This is Amy Foster, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Robin Hobb,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Amy Foster.
It's episode 251 of the Author Stories Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We had a milestone episode yesterday with episode 250. We've got tons more shows lined up for you. Author interviews with the very best folks in publishing today. Whether it's indie, traditional publishing, hybrid, no matter what, we talk to them all from all across the spectrum of genre to bring you the very best in the craft of writing. It's because of our great sponsors that we're able to bring you these excellent shows, and I'd like to thank some of those sponsors today. If you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the menu that says Advertise. Click on that, and you can help sponsor the show as well. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, my very favorite monthly publication. If you want that old pulp magazine feel that you used to get when you were a kid, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is the book for you. They're up to episode 19 now, the Halloween issue, and you're going to love it. Each month features a different set of writers bringing you the best in weird, pulpy stories. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Go pick it up today. From my friend Nick Breaker, Essence, Book 1, Septima. Nick Breaker is one of the best science fiction writers out there today, and this new series that he's working on is crazy good. It mixes urban fantasy and science fiction and extraterrestrials in a great mix. Delivers a story that's adventure with a little steamy and guaranteed to keep you glued to the page. Essence, Book 1, Septima by Nick Breaker. Go pick it up today. ThirdScribe.com is the place to go if you love books, or if you're a writer and want to connect with other writers, or you want to find readers for your books. ThirdScribe.com can help you get started. You can join for free and meet some of your favorite writers, or you can set up a basic author website for free, and then there's multiple levels of help and support that you can get from ThirdScribe.com. I love these guys. I love what they're doing. Go visit ThirdScribe.com today and let Rob and the good folks help you get started. Also, Chronicle World's B-Movie is the latest Future Chronicles edition, Book 16 in the Future Chronicles. This book is awesome, and it's been climbing up the charts since it released just this past week. Mummies and giant robots, werewolves and killer koalas, plague creatures and demonic clowns. They're coming, they're hungry, and they're not human intolerant. In this title, in the acclaimed Future Chronicles series of speculative fiction anthologies created by award-winning author Samuel Peralta, the destination is the B-Movie, the realm of the outlandish and the macabre, the strange and the unexpected. Go pick up B-Movie, Chronicle Worlds, today. Thanks to all our sponsors. At the end of the show, as always, we're going to have a audio clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
Hey everybody, it's Josh Hayes, and I'm here with Chuck Manley and Scott Moon. We are Keystroke Medium, and this is the Keystroke Medium Minute.
This is Scott. I'm here with Josh and Chuck. I'm going to talk today about not waiting for the perfect time to write. So this one's pretty simple, but really important. One of the things that we've had many of our guests talk about and that we've learned individually is that you often can't tell, when you go back and read stuff that you wrote a year ago, you're not going to remember if that was a good day where the words were just flying out, or if it was one where you had to push and get it done. So on this topic, the best practice seems to be set a dedicated time for writing, protect that time, and write. And if you're not having a good day, don't worry about it. Maybe you get less words, maybe you get more. Main thing is don't put it off. Don't procrastinate. Write every day.
That is absolutely correct. Louis L'Amour said that the
to turn on the faucet and get the words flowing, and that never happens if you don't sit down and get started. It doesn't matter if what you're writing is pure gold or utter crap. If you don't make it a habit, if you don't treat it like a job, if you don't make it something you do every day that you can, then, it's going to end up falling by the wayside to some degree. And that's, writers write. That's what we do. So you don't wait for the time. You look for the time. You make the time. I think that's the only way to be successful at this.
Yeah, I agree. And I like to throw another wrench into the mix here and say that, sometimes you have that time that you want to write and then you sit down and no words come and you're staring at the screen and your brain is not producing words. And that happened to me the other day trying to brainstorm on this story. And I have a new project that I was trying to work and the words were not coming. I didn't know anything about the story. I didn't know what I was going to plot. I didn't know what I was going to plan. And so I pulled out a legal pad and just drew a map. And I didn't even know what I was drawing or what was going to end up on the map, but I finished this map and immediately the story started to germinate in my head. And so at the creation process, it helped me. Maybe not so far if you're in the draft and you're stuck, that might not help you. But again, that what goes back to your specific process. But I sat down my time to write and I couldn't. And I think a lot of people make into the habit of, well, I don't have anything to write today. I'm going to go do something else. So don't waste that time. Get your mind flowing into the words. Do that, and then the words will start to like Scott said, when you write done, you go back and you look at it. When the work is done, you won't know which words were the ones that you were inspired to write and which words were the ones that you just, I've got to put these stupid words on this page.
Yeah, you'll be surprised. The other side of this coin is, like my son is a writer and stuff, but he's been planning this novel that he's going to write for like 4 years. So you can someday you got to get down and do the writing. You can't just always plan, always research, always do all the other things that you think are part of the process, and they are. The big thing is don't wait too long to get started.
Right.
So I like to talk to people who have similar interests or go through the same thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, well, this has been Josh for Chuck and Scott. Thanks for listening to this Keystroke Minute. You can find more of our show at keystrokemedium.com, where we have author interviews and craft discussion and a lot of shenanigans. Come out and hang out with us.
Shenanigans.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Amy S. Foster on the show. Amy has a brand new book that releases on October 31st called The Rift Frequency, the Rift Uprising Trilogy, Book 2. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, not in person, but on the phone.
I'm really happy to have you. Amy, I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh, gosh. Man. I don't know that for a long time, growing up, I wanted to be an actress, which is a kind of storyteller.
Yeah.
I was a terrible actress. I was just awful. I mean, I wasn't that bad, but I was pretty bad. When I got into college, I thought I would be a diplomat, which was also a terrible idea because I am like the least diplomatic person ever. So that's I got an international business degree. But so at some point after college, I really started writing a lot of poetry, and I'm not sure. I think probably like after I moved to London, right after I graduated, and I was alone, and there was no internet back then. And the TV in London, you only have like 2 channels. So I think I didn't have a lot of friends. So I started to write poetry. And I think that's where it began with me, was the poetry. I mean, I'd always been writing, and drawing and sketching and writing poetry, but I got really serious in London. And with that, I sort of met a music producer, and he started putting sort of music to my poetry. And I'm very ashamed to admit that I thought that I was going to sort of be the new, like, female Jim Morrison, which is, like, humiliating to admit to. I think every sort of young girl my age goes through a Jim Morrison phase. So I think that's probably it. That's a very long answer to your question, though.
Well, it's more than just girls go through that. There's a lot of guy writers who had a really horrible poetry phase, and
it was. I mean, and Jim Morrison. I thought he was such a genius, and now I think about it and I listen to it, and I'm like, oh God, wow.
Well, there was a lot of chemical enhancement that eased, some of that.
And like a little more ego than I think we need.
Right. When you're the Lizard King.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he really believed it.
London sounds like the ideal place to really get into poetry.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about where you grew up. You obviously didn't grow up in London.
No. I was born on Vancouver Island, so I'm Canadian. And then I lived in LA until I was 8, and then my parents divorced, and I moved to Toronto when I was 8. So my formative years were spent in Toronto from 8 to 18. So I really think of Toronto as my hometown.
Gotcha. Born on the west coast of Canada, and then down to LA, and then over to the east coast of Canada. What was the...
Yep.
I think a lot of people romanticize Canada, especially a lot of Americans do, because you guys don't seem to have a lot of the baggage we have. How do you think of that? Do you think of this idyllic upbringing in Canada, or
no? No. No, I mean, certainly, I went back every summer and spent my summers on my aunt and uncle's farm on the island, which was very magical. And my very first book that I ever wrote takes place on an island. I mean, it is very much the islands, sort of north of Seattle. I'm talking about like the San Juan Islands and then Victoria, Vancouver Island. It is beautiful, beautiful country. I mean, there's no place on earth like it, really. I mean, it's so gorgeous. So that part was idyllic, but in Toronto, I'm what I like to call a starter kid. So there are starter marriages. Well, I was a starter kid in that my parents were together and my dad was not at that point successful or rich or famous or anything. So we were working class family. And then when I moved to Toronto, my dad's career sort of exploded in Los Angeles, but my mom and I stayed very much a working class family with not a lot of money. So we lived in a very bad part of town, and I had to work from the time that I was 13. I mean, we really didn't have any money, so it was difficult. But I mean, my dad stepped in and put me, through private school, which was a saving grace. But I don't, I mean, it was tough, but I wouldn't change any of it because I think it made me a great observer, and I think in a lot of ways. That's the thing about Canada is that we're great observers. We are kind of like the stepsisters, like the slightly unattractive stepsister to America, where we just watch America win, like Homecoming Queen and all of these awards, and we can just sit back and good for you, go for the bronze. That's what we're just not very assertive in that way.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have some Canadian friends. I can't wait to try that out on.
Yeah, go for the bronze. I mean, that's the thing. You watch the Olympics and they're like, the coverage in Canada, it's like, good for him. He got a bronze medal. That's just amazing. Whereas in America, they'd be like, well, they tried their hardest, but they didn't get the gold. The Canadians are so different.
Way to go coming in third.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's all perspective, isn't it?
It is.
A lot of writers had a very had an upbringing where they were exposed to lots of literature and lots of books and different artistic expression. You come and you talked about it there just for a second, and I don't want to belabor it, but your father, is a person who it was very important is very important in the entertainment world. Did any of the involvement that he had in the music industry and around musicians and any of that, did any of that have any effect on you wanting to be a storyteller?
I mean, yes and no, I think. You know, he is an extraordinary man with an extraordinary talent. And I don't think I'm a spoiler alert when I tell you that my career as a poet did not pan out. And it was my dad who really encouraged me to become a lyricist, and which is great. And he really did do a lot of teaching. I mean, eventually I moved to Nashville to really learn the craft of songwriting, which is a different kind of storytelling, but very important. And so I think in that way, absolutely, he was. But I'm so proud of my parents because they're really self-made people. My mom quit school when she was 14. My dad quit school when he was, I don't think, 16. And they were both, you know, musicians from that time on. And so school and books and academia was not a part of their life. But they understood that they had this weird sort of nerdy kid who really loved reading. And so I think that, especially my mom, you know, I had a lot of her friends sort of step in and take me for the weekends and look after me and introduce me to a lot of, she understood where her boundaries were and what she couldn't teach me. So I had a lot of really great, many mothers, I will say, that sort of swept in and taught me about writing and literature. And my mom had this friend named Joanne who was really smart and read everything, and she lived in this apartment in Toronto filled with like velvet couches and, you know, just walls and walls of books and piles of books. And she would just like sit there. Looking back, it's so funny because I was like 11, and she would just sit there and smoke cigarettes and, you know, cry about her failed love affair with Leonard Cohen. And it was so funny now looking back. If you can imagine her just talking to me about, you'll never know the genius that is Leonard. You know, and I mean, it was just a very bizarre life. But I think, yeah, in that way, they're certainly not academics, my parents, but they're incredibly smart, and they knew what I needed and found a way to give it to me, even though, you know, they weren't the ones that could offer it.
What sort of stories were really capturing your imagination when you were young, when you were that nerdy book kid, as you called yourself?
Nerdy book kid.
Yeah, what were those stories that really resonated with you?
I mean, always magic. Like, if Harry Potter had been around when I was a kid, well, first of all, I have stories that are like living proof that I started writing when I was like 8 and 9 years old about a girl who like lives like in her family's attic, and she gets taken away to like magic school. And not that I think that Joe Rowling ever found these stories, but I mean, I was truly disappointed at 13 when I realized that I was not actually going to go to magic school. And so always magic and sort of the supernatural had always been that sparked my imagination, and still do.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I was
Can you imagine if Harry Potter was around when you were a kid?
I know that's what I was going to say, is that if I was the kid that everyone made fun of because of my Ursula K. Le Guin books, imagine if fantasy literature was mainstream like Harry Potter.
I mean, please. I would have been just in like a robe. I would have been like in my little Ravenclaw every day with a wand. I would have killed it. I would have unabashedly Harry Potter forever.
Yeah, just sassy, walking into economics class. Yeah, just owned it. Yeah,
just like cosplaying and just not even caring. Yeah, that's totally, right. Completely.
Right. I love it. You talked about transitioning from writing poetry to writing lyrics, and even moving to Nashville, which Nashville is a songwriter's town, if there ever was one. And so, tell me a little bit about what the difference is between a poet and a songwriter. And I have the utmost respect for songwriters, because a songwriter can do in 100 to 200 words what it takes me 100,000.
Exactly. Yes, and that is exactly true. Without any exposition or context, you have
none whatsoever, and can absolutely rip your heart out, or can convey the sort of can bring you right back to a moment, and it's almost that the listener brings all the exposition with them. But the songwriter has to know how to tap into that. So first off, what's the difference in a poet and a songwriter, and what makes the two mediums, although they're so very similar, what makes them so vastly different?
I don't think they are that different, to be honest with you. I mean, except for, when you're writing poetry, you can use, I think, maybe smarter vocabulary. I think that, and poetry is possibly, as a songwriter, I was never writing for myself. I was always writing, I was never doing it to please just me. I was always doing it with an audience in mind, so I think, or a singer in mind, so I think that's one aspect of it. But I think, and smarter vocabulary is probably not the right word. I don't know I think the way that songs get to you, I think that it's although I love, Joni Mitchell and I love, very smart lyricists, I think the most successful songs are the songs that reach like the person who has a PhD in philosophy and like the plumber. You know what I mean? Like they speak in conversational tones and they find a way to say what you're feeling or thinking without like without like I love you to the depths of my soul. Like they'll find a way to say that's not that.
Yeah.
That someone will instantly that's right, that someone will instantly connect to and relate to. And that's why, someone like Leonard Cohen is such a genius because he does that so brilliantly. But again, Leonard Cohen is not for everybody, and now not everybody gets Leonard Cohen. But if you look at like the Beatles, for example, I mean, they didn't use, unless they were on one of their crazy acid trips talking about like the walrus and stuff like that. But like mostly their songs are like Yesterday, The Long and Winding Road. I mean, they're not overly. What's the right word? Clever? I don't know I'm not sure what the right word is.
Just not a lot of subtext. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's very straightforward, and they're not using like high-handed words, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Not flowery and
not even. It's not even just flowery, but it's like accessible.
Right.
It's not like you won't feel silly if you are listening and you don't understand, a word. Well, you can get away with that in poetry because you're studying it, you're reading it, you can go back and look, but you don't want to miss that moment where it connects with the melody because someone's like, what does that word mean?
Right. So at what point did you know that you were going to be a successful lyricist? How long did it take for you to get into it and realize that, okay, this is something I'm going to excel at?
I think probably, it was the sort of thing where my dad introduced me to Michael Buble, and at the time, he was just this kid. We were both pretty much the same age. He was from Canada, I was from Canada. He had a very short development deal with my dad, and he was so sure that he was going to be this massive star. And he didn't know anyone in LA, so he stayed with me and my first husband, and sort of we took him in, and he promised that when he got rich and famous that he would take me with him. And I was like, whatever, Frank Sinatra. Like, I didn't think in a million years that that's what was going to happen. But, he's one of my best friends and the closest thing to a brother that's not a stepbrother, I guess, that I have. And sure enough, on his second record, he took me with him. And I guess after I got my first number one was Home. And I felt like that was a bit of like a cheater sort of a thing. Like we just happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right song. But then when I wrote my second number one with him, I thought like, well, maybe this is more than just luck that we managed to do this.
You described yourself as a starter kid. Did you feel like Home was your starter song?
Yeah, I think Home is listen, it's crazy. People love that song, and the first four lines were his, and the rest of the lines are mine. But he wanted the song to be something very different, and I had moved to Nashville at that point, and I mean, I had been writing songs in LA, but I hadn't really, it was still more, I was figuring it all out. But by the time I wrote Home, I had really had like a good 6 to 8 months under my belt, which is nothing in the big scheme of things, but where I really said to him, like, you've got to be honest about what it's like to be on the road and how hard it is to be on the road, and not make this like an anthemic song, but make it a more personal song. And so it worked. And yeah, I mean, it's not like my favorite song I've ever written. I mean, the favorite songs that I've ever written will probably never see the light of day, but it's so meaningful to so many people. It holds like a really important place in many people's hearts, and for that, I'm very grateful.
Well, sure. Songwriting is a very personal thing, or at least it can be. And but what is it like to write for someone else?
It's not personal to me.
Okay,
it's a job.
Right. Okay.
It's not personal to me at all. I mean, songwriting is my day job, I like to say. I mean, I can make a living actually as an author now, which is kind of crazy too, but before I made a living as an author, I would always say that songwriting was my day job, which is crazy. But it's not. I mean, look, at first I got really burnt out because I was writing 5 days a week with different writers. I would get to work at 10 and I would leave at 3 with a song in tow, and that would be it, 5 days a week for like a year. And then I got really burnt out, and then I was a little more selective about who I wrote with and when I wrote. And then I was just writing maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week. But still, you walk into a room, hey, how's things? How's the kids? Okay, I have this line for a song, this idea. Yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then you go home. It's not like it is for some people. It's not like I'm Fiona Apple, ripping my heart out with every song. I mean, so.
Right. But then you write a song that hits people where they live and resonates with them so deeply and is a cultural touchstone for a lot of people. Like they hear that song and they remember where they were, or this song triggers a memory and they wind up, crying in their car and all that. And you're like, no, I just clocked in at 10.
Like that. But that's where you rely on your craft, though. I mean, that's really where you just rely on your craft. It's the same thing. I mean, people look at me and I think they have this sort of weird idea about who I am. But the truth is that 95% of my life has been about failure. And 5% of my life has been about success. And that success has been extreme. But, I've written
that's a
1,000
lot
songs.
of us, Amy. That's a lot
of us. That's right. That's most of us. I mean, that are artists.
We don't talk about all the failure. It's that 5% that we trumpet everywhere. But if it weren't for that 95%, the 5% wouldn't mean anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also what gives us imposter syndrome, too, because we're so used to hearing no. I mean, I've got 1,000 songs that no one will hear. I've written 5 books that no one will read. They're not in the garbage, but they're in the garbagey file on my computer. I mean, I get told no every day. And it's something so I think that, and then when you finally get something, you're so used to being heard, you're so used to being told no, and you're so used to sort of that failure that it takes a moment to sort of click into that, I sort of call it the bandwagon effect, where you're on your path and you're going, and when you're young and idealistic, you really are in a bandwagon, but then the older you get and the more cynical you get, your bandwagon becomes a car, and then your car becomes like a micro car, and then it becomes like a motorcycle, and you're just barreling through trying to get things done, and then you stop, and there's a ticker tape parade, and all this stuff happens, and you're like, whoa, I got to where I'm going, and then everyone tries to get on your motorcycle, and you're like, get off! You're like, what are you doing? You don't have room anymore on your bandwagon. Like, you can't believe your success. Like, that you can't believe that it even happened because you sort of streamlined your expectations so narrowly.
I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're writing for someone else, writing songs, and you're putting yourself, I don't know. I mean, do you think about who's delivering the song? Do you try to get in their voice? Does that matter at all?
No, because I think a great song, I mean, as covers prove, a great song can really be sung by anyone. So I think you're just always trying to write a great song.
Gotcha. At what point did you start thinking about writing novels?
Well, I think the idea of writing a novel is very daunting to most people, and most people are like, that's the number one question. I'm sure you hear it too. Like, how do you write a book? And my answer is always like, you write 1 page a day for a year and you have a novel. And so for me, I had all of these, so I went from poetry to like short stories, as if that would be easier, which it is like probably harder. And then I tried to, and then I got an agent, only because the agent was like a friend of a friend's, and they said, like, look, you're never going to sell short stories, but if you make this into one story, we might be able to sell it. So I went back, and it took me a very long time, and I wrote these 8 stories and turned them into one story and sold that book, which is called When Autumn Leaves, in 2007, I guess I sold it. And looking back, it's funny because I recently reread it, and there are some parts. So it's basically the story of this small town in the Pacific Northwest, and there's like this head sort of witch, I want to call her, but she's so much more than a witch. And she's leaving, and she's looking for her replacement. And so it's the 8 stories of these disparate women in this town trying to become her replacement and the magical things that happen to them along the way. And the stories are fantastic, but my writing has improved so much since then that I read it recently and I was like, God, I can't believe that I got away with this in this book. Like, there's like chapters of just like exposition. I'm like, oh my goodness, how did that even happen? But, you know, people love that book. I have like a weird cult following about that book, and I get emails weekly wanting more. And I did try to write sequels. I wrote like 5 or 6 sequels to that book that no one would buy, that no one wanted. Wow. And which was crazy. But now I look back and think, like, thank goodness, because I don't think those sequels were that great. And that's when I sort of flipped and decided to write The Rift, and really go, because for some reason magic and the supernatural and stuff, it flies in YA, but doesn't fly as much in adult literature, which is, I'm not sure why, because it's mostly adults that read YA. Right. So I'm not sure why.
Yeah, unless you're Neil Gaiman or something like.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You know, you have to have this reputation as being, you know, kind of odd, and I don't know. It's as soon as you say there's a rule about it, there's the you know, the exception to that rule. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, like Stephen King does it, but there's like a horror element of his. You know, I mean,
yeah,
he's a genius, but there's always something like really disturbing. In my books, I had to learn, like, I would just have 350 pages of people being nice to each other and doing magic. And my agent was like, you know, that's not really a book. Right. I'd be like, but they're just nice. Like, they don't. Why does there have to be conflict? Like, why can't they just all get along? And she's like, raise the stakes. And I've learned to raise the stakes, but
they just want to go to Tim Hortons and
why does everyone have to like be murdery? Why can't everyone just get along? So yeah, I think that's how that sort of happened. That transition happened, where I was writing short stories and then turned that into a novel.
You know, what's really interesting too, Amy, is that if the sequels to When Autumn Leaves would have sold, you know, you might have kind of gotten pegged as, you know, the writer that writes those witch stories from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And never gotten to, you know, kind of stretch out to the cool sci-fi that you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's exactly true, and that's why, you know, it was. I always say that it was the best thing that never happened to me, because you're right. I would have stayed in that adult lane, and I would have had like this very narrow audience, and you know, the first set of sequels that I wrote were really high concept fantasy, like super high concept fantasy. And when those didn't work, I tried like a down home sort of like mystery type of deal, which is not my genre. And so when all of that failed, I really had to sort of take a look at myself, because it's weird, because I'm successful as a lyricist and I'm making money, you know, I'm making a living, but I'm not feeling fulfilled. So when you don't have that, like, you know, not having money can sometimes be a real motivator, can make you hungry. So I felt like I wasn't necessarily as hungry as maybe I would have been if I hadn't had the luxury of, the safety net of being a lyricist, which again sounds ridiculous. But I think again, I go back to that sort of that place of failure where I just took every failure, and then I was sad for a couple of days and sort of licked my wounds, and then found a way to sort of step up and write a different story and tell a different story, and that's what happened with the Rift Uprising. And it was, again, it's funny because it's a YA novel, but I sold it to an adult sci-fi imprint, which I didn't even know enough about the book business to know that your books couldn't be in two places in the bookstore. And no one told me. and so it's been the past 2 years of this journey have really been about making my way in the YA world when there's no YA support system for me at Harper Voyager.
Yeah, and we're seeing this new. I don't know. I've seen it mentioned a couple of times in different places with a couple of different authors as kind of new adult. I think they're calling it, and it's this. It's kind of this hybrid of YA, but with more mature substance. Or I mean, I'm not sure.
It's a misnomer. I think it's a misnomer. Well, first of all, the new adult category is dying. I think it was ignited to life by the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. And it was new adult, was really just contemporary romance, where it was firsts, mostly just first sex. I mean, you read new adult, and if I'm being completely honest, it's straight up I don't even want to call it erotica because that makes it sound too highbrow. But it's pretty porn, pretty porny. I guess that could be the word I'm going to use. I wish there was a new adult section, a subgenre section for sci-fi and fantasy and other types of contemporary where I know that my reader's not going to be 13 years old. But at the end of the day, I have older teenage children. I mean, my first daughter is in college. My second daughter just started high school. And I had all these kids around me, and I was reading all these YA novels, and they didn't talk the way real teenagers talked. Because you have this strange thing where the readers sort of read down. So if you're writing YA, The Hunger Games is a great example where there's no swearing and there's no sex. And I'm thinking do you know that that's just what teenagers do all the time? They just swear and talk and think and do and have sex and then get drunk and then deal with their parents. And, so to me it felt very disingenuous to have this YA category that was really, I think, should be called, really in the middle school reader category, not young adult.
It's really sanitized and just kid gloves. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. And I think that whole dystopian, my book gets labeled dystopian a lot, and it's not dystopian at all. It's just nothing about it that's dystopian. Yes, my character is a teenage super soldier, but she works and then she goes home and watches Netflix. It's not the end of the world. Right. But I think that's what what happened was, from everywhere from The Giver to Divergent to Hunger Games, you have this dystopia, and because it's the end of the world, teenagers act like adults because it's the end of the world. And they're worried about surviving, not about having sex. Right. When I first picked up the Rift Uprising and started reading it, I had to flip over to your bio a couple of times because I was is this really the Amy Foster that co-wrote I Still Haven't Met You Yet?
Yeah, I know.
But after talking to you, I'm of course this is exactly the same Amy. This is a perfect natural progression from you as an artist. When you started writing, because even when Autumn Leaves is really a collection of shorter works that are kind of combined into an overarching narrative.
That's true.
Yeah, but the Rift is the first novel-length story that was that way from beginning to end, right?
Well, no, it was the first one that was published.
Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, and trust me, no one was more surprised. I got this insanely huge book deal. And I mean, I got a book deal that was so big that made other people's like mouths drop open and their like eyes fall out. They can't believe how big my book deal was. And from that, I got, you know, all of this movie interest, and I definitely felt like the prom queen for like a good 6 months. And then I realized as the arcs were going out and people were reading them, really hardcore science fiction fans that expected something like Ursula K. Le Guin or Philip K. Dick or something, and they're reading it and they're going, this is like Twilight. What are you doing? I was like, well, it's YA. It's a thing. So yeah, that it was, but again, I go back to that idea of failure. And if I think that if it had come out on a YA imprint and had risen to that level of what it was signed, what I got my deal as, I wouldn't have learned as much about the book business as I did. And I'm so glad that I did, because it's been definitely a slow burn, the series, and it's starting to collect steam now, which is amazing. But now that it's collecting steam, I know so much more. I had no idea about like co-op or, you know, the marketing or PR. Like I really didn't know any of that. And I don't think many authors do, to be honest with you. I mean, do you know about all that stuff? Do you feel like authors are aware of that?
Oh, no, I feel like that the industry is constantly changing and authors are constantly running behind, trying to catch up and stay on top of everything that they should be doing.
Yeah, and that sort of, and also there's this really huge lack of transparency from the publisher, not letting, you know, their authors know what's going on, because of course they have like 450 books that they're trying to sell, and they can't sort of mollycoddle authors individually unless they're like, again, Stephen King or something, you know, or Joe Rowling. So you don't really know what your money is being spent on. You don't know what your marketing budget is. You don't know that like how important your print run is in the first go. And you don't know that like when you walk into a store, so much of it is just optics. And like when you see a big display in Barnes and Nobles and there's like 100 books there and you assume that it must be a best-selling book, but it's not necessarily. The publishers have just paid for that space. Right. Because exactly. They really believed in that book.
Right, and then the publisher paying for that space will ultimately be handed down to the authors paying for that space.
That's right. Yeah.
I it was a really great example of kind of the artist awakening to that. I forget what it was. It was a biography that I read. Maybe Van Halen. It was written by their road manager. And there was this great story of they threw this huge party, and that the record label threw them, and their manager kept trying to tell them, "No, you're paying for this." And they didn't get that until one day they got off of tour and had a sold out tour and all this, and got home and they were flat broke. And he said, "Okay, remember all those things I kept telling you that you're paying for? This is what happened." And then all of a sudden, the artist turns business savvy, after
you do
that.
have to be. I mean, you can't have, you are the CEO of your own company, and just because, I think that's another thing too, and maybe why I approach my writing so much like a job. Yeah. And maybe that's the other great thing that being a lyricist has done, is that if you believe that your inspiration has to come from like the heavens, or like the muse has to come down and like kiss your cheek in order for you to work, first of all, you're headed down a very bad road. But it also will alienate you from the audience that you're trying to reach, because no one else lives that way. So who could relate to that? And it'll also sort of give you this mindset of like, well, they'll just deal with it. Like, I'll just do me, like being like this fabulous writer who doesn't think about the outside world in my writing cocoon, and like I'll just leave so and so to deal with so and so, and it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Well, and if you're that pretentious artist like that, you're also going to alienate yourself from people that want to work with you, and that's going to be another rough time all of its own.
Yeah, I mean, you meet the same people on the way up as you do on the way down, for sure.
That's right. Well, let's talk about the craft of novel writing for just a minute, because as a songwriter, and I keep going back to this because I'm fascinated by
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the work that you do there, and the way that you can clock in, create a song, then go home and cook meatloaf or whatever. Is it blows my mind. But so when you're approaching the novel and you're building characters and you're making characters that you can stay in the head of for a lot longer than you do the character that you create for a song. Maybe you're telling the story of, some forlorn character that sums up in 3.5 minutes.
Right.
But then you're creating this character in this novel that has a much richer backstory, and you get down into the minutia that you never will in a song.
Right.
And the writing of this thing, could take anywhere from, 6 months to a year and a half, whatever. And you're living with this character longer. So what is the difference for you as the writer in those two things, and how do you adjust to switching to longer form fiction like novel writing?
Well, I always think of a song as a sort of a musical snapshot, like a moment in time that somebody is feeling a certain way about someone or about their life or about where they are. It's a mental idea of just like a sliver of a second of how someone's feeling in a moment. And then obviously a novel is, you've got action. Well, it took me a while to get to the point where there was action involved. But I'm a planner, and it's never taken me 1.5 years to write a book ever. I mean, I usually write a book. It usually takes me about 4 months to write a book from start to finish. But that's because I am a planner, like to the nth degree. So I get all my characters and all my names, and I see them and I imagine them, and I'm always thinking about them. And then I have my story that I want to tell, and then I have little index cards in a book that I can rip the pages out, move them around. And so each scene in the book is really detailed. And then in my first draft, I basically just write what's happening. And then in my second draft, I go back and make it just better. Not so, you know what I mean? But Not everybody writes that way, and everyone has their own, some people just get up in the morning and they write. And they don't even think about where their story is going in, and they end up with a 400,000-page manuscript that takes them 1.5 years to write, and then they have to go back and they have to take it away and take scenes out and all of that stuff, which is fine and it works for some people. But then sometimes you get authors that get really attached to their words and they don't want to cut anything. And I think that's one of the great things about being a lyricist, because I understand that you have to serve the story, and I'm a collaborator by nature. And so I trust that if 4 people tell me that this is not going to work and it's, extemporaneous and it's not serving the story, I'm very happy to take it out because it's just words. It's just words. A lot of other authors don't approach it that way, and they get very territorial and very precious about what they've written. I don't think it's because they're assholes, but I think it's because they feel like they might not ever write anything that good again. And the truth is, you will write something that good again.
Yeah. Do you hold your writing time and space precious? Do you need to create a particular atmosphere before you write?
Well, I used to write from home. I had an office. And it worked when all my kids were in school during the day. But then my kids, it was summertime and they were in and out of the house, and I was like, I have to work. Especially after I sold the Rift Uprising, I was like, I can't, they're in and out of the house all day long during the summer and ask me what I'm doing and, what's going on. And I was like, I'm at work. And they're like, no, you're not. You're just writing. And I was like, ugh. So I bought my own condo here in Portland. That's my writing. And I come here every day, from 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and I work until 5. I don't spend every minute of the day, writing, but I spend like probably on average like 3 or 4 hours, and the rest of it I sort of do other work, busy work, and putter around. I mean, my husband, it was hilarious because he was like, wait a second, you're like buying your own apartment? I was like, yeah, I actually am buying my own apartment. I guess I am. He's like, he's like, I don't know if you'd ever let me do that. I was like, no, but you're not a writer. And now
is there anything you need to tell me, Amy?
No, but it's actually worked out great because we'll have like date nights here, and we have a place of our own, as if we can sort of like close the door and pretend that we don't have like 3 children, which is great.
Right.
Like we can just be like the single like urban couple. So it's actually worked out really great. But when I first told him, he was like, "Wait a minute, you're actually like buying your own house?" And I was like, yeah, I guess. I guess technically I am, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, so it's just by nature of having so many kids
right
at home that I wasn't working.
Yeah, my wife and I have 5 kids. And
oh my goodness!
Our oldest is 22. He's a senior in college.
Right.
But he's here local, and then our oldest daughter's in college, and then our middle daughter's a senior in high school, and she gets out of school early. And there's constant traffic, and
constantly, and like people, and they bring other people into your house, and you're like, what?
Yeah. Oh
Who's
yeah,
this person now?
Yeah, we've adopted half the kids in the county that come and eat at our house and stuff.
It's crazy. It's you don't think about that when you have kids, that you're going to have like just constantly people in and out of your house, and when you're trying to work, it's because you're not like digging ditches or like treating patients, they don't see like what you're doing is actually working, because it doesn't look that different from looking on the internet.
Right, and you think, man, if I could ever get to the place where I could work from home, and I won't have commute time, I could just be creative all day long. And man, this
is not true.
That is it is so not true. So not true.
No, and to be honest with you, I don't have enough. Like I usually take it. I have been traveling for the past couple of weeks, so I haven't done it. But usually I take one night a week where I stay overnight at my condo, because I need to have there's that clock watching thing that happens when you're a parent and you're a writer, where that like at 2:30 you have to go pick up kids, or at 4:30 you have to get ready to leave, or what I mean. Like there's always like this cutoff time, so you can't just like spend 12 hours writing. So, and I told my husband, who was with the fire department but got injured and is now no longer with the fire department, I was like, if you get to have a 24-hour shift, like I get to have a 24-hour shift. And it's hilarious that I would even compare my writing to him, like going out and saving lives and like burning buildings. But, and at first he really balked at the idea. And I said, but I need to like wake up in the morning and be able to just spend, 12 or 14 hours working per week, and not having to worry about coming home and dealing with dinner and dealing with kids and dealing with all of their, and being present for them, because I'm still sort of at home at the office thinking about my work.
Yeah. I get it. I really do.
It sounds so selfish, but that's how you succeed. You have to be a little bit selfish.
You do. And you have to put it in perspective that this is my work. This is my, if you even want to, use words like calling and all of that stuff, if you're going to take it that seriously, then you have to take it that seriously.
Yeah, and I don't work at all on the weekends. You know what I mean? Like I am just a Monday through Friday person. So they have me all weekend long, and they have me at, from 6 until 10 at night, and, 6 nights a week, and then I work. And at first, especially as a mother, you feel like it's very wrong to, mothers consistently put themselves last. And the truth is that, there's a reason why when you're flying, the flight attendants tell you to deal with your own oxygen mask and then your kid's oxygen mask. Because if you're not taken care of, then you can't take care of anybody else.
That's
like exactly. You really need to come first, which is such an anathema to how we're supposed to think as parents. We're always supposed to put our children first. But if we consistently put our children first, I don't think that it sets a good example, because it kind of sets us up to be martyrs, I think, in a way. And I also don't think that you're your happiest self, because, you're just constantly living for your children, and then what's left over for you.
Right. And using that analogy of the oxygen mask is exactly right, because the guilt that we feel it's a lie, because if we're not taking care of the thing that makes us who we are, we're not doing anybody else any favors.
No. And look, they're going to turn around and they're going to blame you for everything anyways, so it doesn't really matter. And then if you're a working mom, you're never home, you don't care, there's no way to win. Because you're never going to, unfortunately, as I tell my kids all the time, which disappoints them, your parents never love you the exact way that you need them to. And you just need to learn that right off the bat.
And then you grow up and you realize that they loved you exactly the way you needed them to. You just didn't have any sense to know it. Yeah. Right.
Or they loved you the way that they could.
The only way they could.
The only way they could. You know what I mean? It's not, some kids, as you have 5 kids, which is, I can't even believe that. I have 3 and I feel like I'm losing my mind, but all kids are different. We don't change. We just get older. So you're born the way that you're born. And some kids don't need some kids are sort of really born independent and really resent their parents hovering. And some kids need their parents to hover all the time. It just depends.
Yeah. And if they're going to wind up in therapy anyway, let's give them
something to
get their money's
worth. At least you're going to be happy.
That's right.
They're not going to be happy.
Yeah. Let them get their money's worth.
That's right. Let them get their money's worth. That's awful. People are going to be listening to this like, that Amy Foster is the most terrible. She's like a mother. She has her apartment. She leaves her kids. She just works. She's so selfish. But it sounds terrible. But I truly believe that the best, whether you're a writer or a teacher or whatever it is, you really need to take care of yourself first. And when you do that, you will be such a better parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such a better parent.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Amy, let's talk about The Rift, because this the second book will be coming out on Halloween Day, on October 31st.
Yeah.
And I'm so looking forward to it. The first book is amazing. Where did the idea for this story come from? What's the setup for it? If someone is not familiar with it, how did the story come into your life?
I don't know, to be honest with you. They just happen. They're just there. I don't even know where these ideas come from. I sometimes feel like I'm possessed or something. They just appear. But so the Rift Uprising is the story of a 17-year-old girl named Rin, who has been altered and turned into a super soldier by sort of a sinister company called the Allied Rift Coalition. And she guards a portal to of other Earth. And she doesn't ask the right questions that she needs to ask because, well, I don't know if it's really a spoiler alert, but I won't say anything. But anyways, she meets a boy, and the boy becomes the catalyst to allow her to start asking all the right questions. And in the process, there's a bit of a scuffle in Battleground, Washington, which is where this takes place, at the Rift site. So the first book really delves into her feeling like she has to keep the secret from her family, and she's a soldier, and who is she and why did they make her? And in the second book, Frequency, is really, so she goes through the Rift, and it takes place on 11 different versions of Earth, I think. And so that is a little more fantasy-based, the second book. And where the first one, they called it military thriller, which I found to be hilarious, because if you met me, and I would be the last person, oh yeah, Amy, she writes military thrillers. And so the second book is a little more fantasy, because obviously when you have an infinite number of Earths, anything can happen. So you can have planets and Earths where there were no humans, where all the humans died, where they're running on a different timeline because the Earth cooled or, heated up a little faster. And so she can go through and be like in ancient Greece, or she could be. I mean, there's so many iterations of Earths. I mean, the imagination, it boggles the imagination. So, and she's sort of navigating, trying to find out the reality about what's going on with her, which is a pretty big thing that she discovers. And then the third book will be about how she deals with this discovery and how she sort of reclaims her independence, I will say. So that's what it's about.
The idea of the multiverse, as you were talking about a minute ago, is a huge part of these books. What is it about the multiverse that intrigues you? And was there any special research that went into?
A lot of research. Not just watching Star Trek episodes, but like actual research. You know, I am a big science fiction fan, and I will say I've seen every episode of Star Trek there was and is and currently. So I love science fiction, but the multiverse is not like a pie in the sky theory. I mean, Stephen Hawking believes in the multiverse. And although scientists get to different places, arrive at, you know, their theories about how the multiverse exists, they get there via different places. Some have to do with the Big Bang, some have to do with the expanse of the universe and how big it is. But it's not a pie in the sky theory. I mean, most credible physicists, not even credible, most physicists believe in the multiverse and that there are other versions of the universe happening concurrently at the same time as ours. So it's not that weird. Although it sounds super crazy, it's really not.
Yeah, as a novelist, what sort of freedoms does it afford you to deal with something like the multiverse?
So many. I mean, you take in evolutionary biology, you know, climate science. There's not just humans. I mean, in my session, there's robotics, there's DNA, there's genetics. There's so much earth science, sociology, anthropology. There's so much to look at. The scope is so massive when it comes to what this Earth. I mean, there's another Earth where you and I are not having this conversation. It's just as simple as that. Then there are other Earths where there are like snake people. You know what I mean? Like it's where there's no humans and everyone looks like insects. So it's sort of it's so huge that you have to narrow it down. But I just had a blast with it. And I did do a lot of research. I did a lot of research in all of those fields, and also, I mean, primarily physics, because I am a physics nerd, but how they got to the multiverse, and through the multiverse, if you've read the books, you know, that they use sound and sound wave particles to open and navigate through the multiverse, which was great for me because, of course, as a musician and a lyricist, I deal with sound and music and tones all the time. So, and
sound and music are the are a great a great tool because it's kind of like magic in the real world. You know that these things that we can use to affect people and emotion and all of that. There's a kind of a strange connection there.
I think so. I really do feel like so much of science, if someone came like from 200 years in the past and they looked at our lives, they would think that we were all magicians.
Right, exactly.
You know, we talk to little things beside our desk that tell us what's going on in the world and gives us the news, and we look on our electronic, magical, glowing phones that we can see people's faces from a million miles away. I mean, they would think that we were magic. And it's not magic, it's just science. So, yeah, I think it's all, I think you don't have to understand in the same way, which is why I love magic too. It's like you don't have to understand how an iPhone works. I couldn't tell you how exactly my iPhone works or like what happens during FaceTime. But right. I enjoy the experience. But I couldn't tell you scientifically. There is a scientific reason, but I don't know what it is.
Right. You you said earlier that the books are not dystopian, and they're not. But why was that important to you to tell a story like this? But that is, a lot of those, a lot of popular fiction now is very has a very defeatist tone. Even though a lot of those books are, they're stories of people coming through and coming out of those things and finding hope within those. But this is not that kind of book. Why was it important to you to have a very different tone about this?
Well, besides Star Trek, my other favorite show is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I think that, for me, I really wanted to create a female warrior archetype trope that was believable and nuanced and three-dimensional. That was very important to me, even before Trump was elected, which is funny that I mean, it's not that funny, but even before all of this, the terrible things that are happening in the world were happening, I was imagining this young woman who has, really her full agency, is a soldier, but also a girl, and likes boys, but, could just as easily like girls, but likes boys, but still can look at down the scope of her rifle and shoot someone. People don't like this idea. And I wanted to make people uncomfortable. People don't like this idea of the female warrior being a destroyer and a creator all at the same time. We have to pick and choose. When you look at Wonder Woman, for example, which is a movie that I absolutely loved, and I've been talking about this a lot lately. It's not that I didn't love Wonder Woman. I just didn't know why her big superpower at the end of the day was love. Like, why couldn't she just defeat the guy because she was just a better soldier? Like, why did she have to, why was loving her, because she was a girl? Like, that doesn't make any sense. If you really look at female warrior archetypes and not confuse them with Katniss Everdeen, who is the reluctant hero archetype, really just women whose sole purpose it is to fight. They really are only allowed to be fighters, and it goes back to Greek and Roman mythology, where all of the huntresses were virgins. They were never allowed to be sexualized. All the way to Black Widow in the Avengers, and she talks about how she's a monster because she can't have children, which is ridiculous. So for me, it was very important for girls to see this fully actualized, realized girl who is extraordinarily gifted at fighting and doesn't need to apologize for being good at fighting, and who can think about tactics and munitions and things and turn around and think about the guy that she likes 5 seconds later. People are very uncomfortable with this idea. People are very uncomfortable with the idea that a girl can snap someone's neck and turn around and go and be with her boyfriend and watch TV. They really don't like it. Men, absolutely, that's par for the course. But if you'll be hard pressed to find a female warrior archetype that is not just a guy with boobs, or that isn't doing it because she, is damaged some way. You know what I'm saying? Like there was a lot. I think for me that was a really important thing. We can't get Buffy back, but like a version of Buffy.
Well, and I have 3 daughters, and I love the idea of them having characters that they can connect with, that they can look up to in some way or feel empowered by, that is a regular person and that has all of the power and all of the giftedness that they have without being broken. I love that. I'm kudos to you for doing that, and who cares who it pisses off. I'm super happy that you're writing.
Thank you. But it's something that people just don't think about. And no. for a lot of and the main thing that I get, like, people are annoyed, like, well, she's doing all of this so she can have sex with a boy, and it's like, well, a little bit, yeah, but that's okay. She's 17. what else should she want to be doing? Like, why can't she be on this journey of being a warrior and also want to have sex? Why is that so? It just really hits people in a weird spot. And I will keep fighting on behalf of Rin and all the other female soldiers out there, so that their jobs, it shouldn't be masculine. Soldier should not be a masculine thing. I think it is, everyone should be able to, every gender should be able to fight for what they believe in and not feel guilty about it, not cry and make excuses. And, we should have just as many female warriors as the guys and be able also to date. I ask you, think of one female warrior besides Buffy who is fully realized and nuanced.
They're hard to come by. I agree.
You can't.
You can't. They're just not there.
No.
Yeah. Well, you are doing the Lord's work there, Amy, and thank you for it. The first book is called The Rift Uprising. The brand new book is The Rift Frequency, out October 31st. We're going to send everybody to go pick up a copy of both of those books, Amy. If people are just now learning about your work, where can they follow you and to find all the great news about what's going on with you?
Amy Foster here on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, or it's just Amy Foster. I think Amy S. Foster on Facebook. But Amy Foster here. Come follow me and see all my adventures.
Perfect. Amy, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They reverently slipped Jason's giant-size X-Men #1 from its mylar protector, drinking in the sweet aroma of browning paper and three-color process that signals only the best and rarest and most wonderful of collectibles. On one page, Professor X raised his fingers to his temples and rallied his X-Men, his psychic commands radiating from his bald head like waves off hot asphalt. "I have psychic powers," Owen blurted. "I want Wolverine's claws." Jason was turning a page. "Snicked! Or, hey, get this. Lightsabers poking out the backs of my hands. Or even, no, I'm totally serious. I have psychic powers." "No, you don't." "I do." Jason laid the comic on the bedspread. He sighed. Owen could be such a spaz sometimes. "Okay," he said indulgently. "What number am I thinking of?" "Stop, it doesn't work that way. What I can do is called a psychic reading, off an object, like getting impressions. When the doorbell rings, if I put my hand on the knob, as soon as I do, I know who's there." "It's called looking through the peephole, moron." "Shut up! And when I touch the phone, I know who's calling." "I'm sure, Mr. Bullshit from Bullshit Mountain. Like my sister or my grandmother, I just know it's them." "There's no such thing as psychics." "Okay, you try." "Don't be stupid. Are you chicken?" "Fine." "Okay." He snatched up a brown paper bag, spotted with grease, and dumped a few stale French fries into the trash can. "I'll put an object in this bag, and you try to guess what it is. Turn your back." Jason did, and heard a rustling behind his head. "Okay, you can look now." Owen produced the bag. It was rounded with some object now. "Don't touch yet, just think. Try to imagine what's inside." "Your lunch?" Jason sneered, but he closed his eyes and tried to imagine. He could hear Owen's breathing. Jason's nose itched. His brain grew bored with nothing to look at, and fragments of images swam in and out of his imagination. "Strawberry," he blurted. Owen reached into the bag, producing a white bowl. Jason had eaten Frosted Flakes from it about 3 days ago. A few stuck to it, like little beige fish scales. "See? I lose." "No, look here." Owen pointed. A design went around the sides of the bowl. A long string of vines and painted fruit. With strawberries. "That's..." Jason began, but didn't know how to end the sentence. "It's cool. See? What did I tell you? Do it again. Jason closed his eyes. An image like daisies and sun and yellow, he blurted after 3 seconds. Oh my God, open your eyes! Owen held a bright yellow highlighter pen. I hadn't even put it in the bag! And so they went, for 30 minutes or more. A staple remover, a toy soldier, a sweat sock, a pencil. Jason never said precisely what was in the bag, but it was always close or related. He'd imagine a cockpit, and Owen would produce a game controller. He'd say plate, and the object would be a CD. He made right angles with his pointer fingers, shrugging, only to have Owen pull out Eliza's knitting needles. His friend became more and more enthusiastic, but Jason became a little scared. You have a real gift, Owen said. You're brilliant. Owen babbled for a long time about astral projection and ESP, how Jason was picking up signals from Owen's own psychic powers, which had obviously been doing the broadcasting. Owen left that night full of plans and experiments, vindicated in his beliefs. Jason sat on the bed after Owen left, thinking hard. He had no explanation for what he'd done, but he knew he hadn't faked it. He couldn't believe, but he couldn't deny either.